a broad definition of innovation. So innovation can happen in many areas. It can be public service, it can be new business model, it can be technology, it can be product, it can be lots of other things. And actually most of the real solutions that we have heard about here and we see around us, they are combinations of large number of smaller innovations. And here is an example of one innovation that we created, and it operates in several countries and between Finland. So we had, a couple of years ago, we had a big need to connect smart Finns and lots of smart non-Finns that are connected to our networks and to our foresight activities. And there was no connection to entrepreneurs around Finland from those locations around the world. So what we did, we developed a new service concept that we call signal sessions. So we gather 50 to 100 people to tens of locations in Finland and around the world to ideate, to listen a couple of 5-minute presentations and to follow minute-by-minute schedule. That's 2 hours total. We get lots of new ideas, new concrete action points, new cooperation starting always from those gatherings. And these gatherings are part of the things that are needed for understanding the systems, for connecting to people who are part of those systems. Because to solve the problems, we need to find gatekeepers and champions in different places so that we can scale up the solutions that we have. We need to help these champions who lead the way and take others on board. So champions, they drive the complex process from idea to innovation and to scale it up. And these individuals can be called entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs. So I believe that we all are entrepreneurs in our own organizations. We try to innovate new, novel methods for helping to boost the innovation. And here is a self-made Angry Birds costume. I don't know how many of you have played this game. It's a Finnish innovation that is going around the world really fast. So it's created by a small Finnish company, and a couple of years ago they had a problem that they had money left only for one more game, so they were going bankrupt pretty soon. And they collected all their experience that they had from 10 years of being in business, and they created this one Angry Birds game, and it was a big hit. And actually that was not the glue there. So they got some downloads, 1 million downloads and so on, but then they figured out that now it might be time to really try to do something big here. So they hired a seasoned serial entrepreneur who had shown in 10 years, 15 years time frame that he really knows what to do. And then he came on board with a condition that, okay, I'll join you if we become the world's biggest media company. So the 20 people in the company agreed, and then they started scaling up. And 2 years later, the game has been downloaded 500 million times globally, and it gives lots of happiness for hundreds of millions of people. And I believe that we can learn from these types of entrepreneurial champions around us. Actually, this same entrepreneur, what he did also 10 years ago, he started a global network called Mobile Monday. It's the world's biggest network of mobile professionals. It operates in 100 different cities, 3 cities in India. And it organizes events and watering hole type of activities where people can meet, they can share their ideas, they can share their value propositions, and they get feedback. And that always makes their ideas and value propositions and innovations better when they interact with other champions from different fields. And these networking events are important because there are people from all types of fields, not only entrepreneurs, there are researchers, there are public servants, and so on. So we need all these people to interact together. And actually, yeah, and this company there, so they are not only in gaming business, they have plush toys you can buy from car market here in a walking distance, and they are doing all kinds of things. Now they are starting to shoot a full-length movie with a producer they hired from Hollywood and so on. So that's about scaling up. We must learn from these types of champions. So then I mentioned the Mobile Monday. That Mobile Monday network and those events that they organize, they can be called as watering holes. So champions come there to water their ideas, to drink the enthusiasm of other champions, and that's how they speed up the things that they are doing. And in Finland, one example of the need for these watering holes and events is that we heard something about thickets yesterday and what they do in Finland. One thing that they run national level R&D and I programs. And of course, all the entrepreneurs and researchers who get funds, they are happy for the funds that they receive from thickets. But actually, even more positive feedback comes from all the events and interaction opportunities that thickets provides through these programs. So our role is to enable innovators and champions, and let's not forget that we all are also those champions and innovators. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for speeding it up. I think we still have about 5-7 minutes to interact. I wish we had more time. So be happy to take questions. No? No questions? All right, then we can thank once again our speakers. Thank you for participating, and we'll turn it over to Dr. Ban for the next session. Thank you.
Countries or emerging countries, products will be made at prices by which access is not an issue. So you have a world successful in designing new solutions, but you have a world where those solutions can't be accepted. So you see there's a broad range of, and all these issues, even, some of these issues will find reflection in our discussion and the presentation by our speakers. I engage myself a lot with international collaborations on affordable innovation, and I actually see the complexity in bioscience that I deal with. Components of the final products, the IP rests with hosts of people, and navigating these relationships and managing these relationships, even where there is good intent, requires a lot of experience and capacity. So again, international partnerships, certainly what I have seen is not all business. There is a lot of interesting collaborative innovation for ensuring access. I take the example of vaccines, for example. It's been a transforming experience that every African kid is able to access the same vaccines as children in the United States. It all happened out of these collaborative arrangements. But at the same time, you need institutional mechanisms that can handle building these partnerships and the intellectual property angles of it. On the other hand, we are now working with a large number of countries collaboratively, and thus far, things seem to be going well. And so I think there's both optimism and growing experience, but also this concern that are we up to the task of handling this on a large scale. So with these few thoughts, I will now request Mr. Neil Feinson to make his intervention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ban, and good morning, everybody. I thought what I'd talk about a little today is the UK's experience of, both our approach to the IP framework, slightly in abstract, but also our experience of mapping that framework to the emerging realities in the world of today. So at the risk of stating the obvious, just ask, why do we have an IP framework at all? Well, yes, of course, it's to reward creation, to reward innovation, but it's also, I think, to promote the use and the uptake of that innovation in a way that benefits society as a whole. And again, even that is both an end in itself and also a spur to further on innovation, to follow on innovation, rather. So, in our view, if you want to support innovation, the intellectual property framework and the system need to respond and adapt to the changing economic and technological environment that you find yourself in. to this end, in the UK, David Cameron, our Prime Minister, asked back in 2010 eminent academic, Professor Hargreaves, to look into the question of, are the UK's laws actually fit for purpose? Are they getting in the way of creating economic incentives for innovation today? And he came back with his findings earlier this year, and his response was perhaps surprising for some, because he said, yes, they are. We need to do a lot more in the UK in order to keep up with the pace of technological change. And he made 10 recommendations, all, and I think perhaps the one I'd start with is just his recommendation that actually in this debate we need to base ourselves on evidence. This is far easier said than done. But I think if you just look at the issues around, the sort of the polemic rather, around copyright piracy, finding hard facts and hard data on which to base public policy is incredibly difficult. Professor Hargreaves emphasises that IPRs need to incentivise invention and creation, as I said earlier, but also allow disclosure of the invention and possibilities for sharing technology, allowing innovators to learn from advances made by others and to build on them. And I think you can also extend this into the copyright area, where protecting incentives to invest in content without damaging innovation and opportunities for new entrants is an incredibly difficult balance to strike. So, those are the recommendations. What do we propose to do about it? Well, I think just start with the patent area, where I think we're not looking to do anything revolutionary. I think we want to tackle the backlogs issue, of course. I think we're committed to resisting the extension of patenting into sectors that are currently excluded, unless, this is the evidence point, unless we can see clear evidence of the benefit to innovation and growth from doing so. And we also want to look into the problem of so-called patent thickets and whether these act as a barrier to entry, particularly for SMEs who want to enter the high-tech sectors. Again, we don't know what we think. We think the evidence is hard to find, so we're conducting a fairly extensive economic research effort in order to try and tie down what the importance of these issues are. On the copyright side, and I want to mention copyright here because I think sometimes it's easy to think of innovation as being about industrial property and about purely the patent system. And actually, when you think of the UK's creative industries, if you think of India's burgeoning creative industries as well, there's a tremendous scope for activity in this area to facilitate innovation in terms of business processes, products, models, etc. It's an incredibly exciting area and one which we shouldn't overlook. And copyright can be a barrier to some of the new developments if we're not careful. So what we want to do is create a copyright exception regime that, as we sort of say, is fit for the digital age. There are some specifics actually to addressing this issue of private copying, having an exception for private copying, dealing with parody, etc. But more broadly, what we aspire to, and I think, again, this is incredibly difficult and we don't have the answer at the moment, is trying to find a way to define a regime that keeps up with technological advancement, which is future-proof. Now, that tends to mean you need to move into a very abstract field in order to do that. So, you know, as I say, a lot of discussion, a lot of experimentation, I suspect, required ahead. But again, that's sort of our aspiration if we can manage it. And of course, I need to say that within Europe, we obviously have to work both within our national regime and within the wider European regime. Finally, just mention our aspiration to build a digital copyright exchange. This would be a sort of an online system to make it far easier both for copyright owners to license their work, but also for copyright users to actually gain a license to use that work. So I hope it will both address compliance issues, but also be a boost to growth in terms of the turnover of that industry itself. Finally, I just want to touch on in some other areas in addition to Hargreaves, to mention a number of ways in which we're looking to encourage innovation by adapting the way in which we approach intellectual property systems. I think we were the first to launch a fast track for green patents, that's patents relating to environmental technologies. The idea there is to significantly reduce the time to grant a patent and help bring green technology to the market far more quickly. Obviously, this is in response to the sort of the global challenges around anthropogenic climate change. I also want to talk about our Digital Economy Act, where we've tried to develop, and again, this is, I think, an area where a lot of nations across the world are trying to find the right balance, but we've tried to develop a graduated set of measures against copyright infringement. So it's not an immediate suspension of internet access for abusers, but rather starting with warning letters, moving up the scale, etc. But I think, whilst we think that is part of the answer, we also think that we need to tackle consumer education, changing business models, etc., to tackle online piracy. And then coming back to sort of the collaborative research area, what the UK invested quite a lot of effort a few years ago looking at technology transfer within the UK and the relationships between business and academia and how IP was involved in those relationships. And what we found was that it was frequently a barrier, frequently a difficulty, was not thought about in time, and so, you know, it only became an issue when it became an issue, and then of course it's far too late to actually do anything sensible about it. So we've developed something called the Lambert Toolkit, and these are a set of model agreements, a decision tree, guidance documents, etc. And I think what we think this could be also very useful in supporting international collaborative research projects involving India and other countries. But I think what we're very interested in is exploring whether that whole area of model agreements from whatever source, and I believe there are versions in India, I think the CSIR has their own model agreements, etc. So I think we'd be interested in looking at whether that is something which can just help our industry and academic institutions just put to one side IP as a barrier, to be able to deal with it sensibly and in a structured way. So to conclude, I think the points I want to get across really is that for the UK, innovation requires policymakers to get this balance between incentives and access rights, and that means focusing on evidence, in our view. Evidence, 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 I think. And on that point, thank you very much, Chairman. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Biswaji? Very well said.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me and to share some of my thoughts on what is a very fascinating issue which Mr. Feinson just mentioned. What I'm going to do is, again, following his his lead, provide some I would say learning experience from how IPRs and the innovation system have actually functioned, and both the pluses and minuses, and what we need to do as we address this issue, particularly in countries such as ours, which is just learning to live with a very strong system of intellectual property rights. Let me also mention that, while my title says intellectual property rights, most of the evidence that I am going to present would be from the area of patents. It won't be as inclusive as Mr. Feinson's. At the outset, the rationale for using IPRs, something that Mr. Feinson also mentioned, and economists, and I also belong to this trade, provide the justification for using IPRs from the point of view of the problem of what we call appropriability. That there is a market failure in the market for knowledge. If there are knowledge to be sort of developed and someone has to invest in R&D, there is a problem of free riding, where there won't be enough incentives for someone to carry on making investments in R&D. And IPRs basically provide the inventors opportunity to recoup the costs by using temporary market exclusivities. And I emphasize here temporary because as we are seeing in today's age and time, and the strengthening of the IP system and lengthening of the patent term, a lot of analysts have started questioning whether this is temporary or this has actually become a permanent exclusivity, because within that 20-year period, in many cases, the technology turns many times over, and there could be a problem of market entry for latecomers. At the same time, one must recognize that the IPRs also promote competition for the driving firms to produce more innovation. So while one talks about the monopoly that the patents create, one would say that it also sort of creates a framework, a competitive urge for firms to produce more innovations or new innovative products to stay afloat in the market. This is something that I've just talked about, is overcoming the problem of market failure, and how this works out in the economic theory. And of course, as I mentioned, that under perfectly competitive markets, private regimes would not have the incentive to invest in the creation of new knowledge or technology. Now, but why opt for IPRs to incentivize innovators? The optimal solution that economists tell us is that the governments could actually subsidize the innovators until the cost of subsidies equaled the benefits to the society. But then, to reach at that optimal level of subsidization is always a very difficult problem. So the second best solution was adopted. IPRs was proposed as the second best solution, and granting temporary monopoly was adopted as a solution. But while IPRs do not provide a perfect solution, it is a compromise that is now well accepted. Now, what are the benefits? And I put down these 4 benefits from IPRs. One can see the stimulation of innovation, which is, of course, the undisputed benefit. The use of new knowledge in productive activity, and this is what I was talking about earlier, that you create a competitive market. Greater dissemination, something that Mr. Feinstein also mentioned, and this is something which is not very well appreciated, because disclosure of the invention is extremely important for dissemination of new knowledge, and this is what the whole contract was between the inventor and the society at large, that unless the disclosure takes place in an adequate and effective manner, and this is what I mentioned here, and TRIPS agreement does talk about this, that disclose the invention in a manner sufficiently clear and complete for the invention to be carried out by a person skilled in the art. So unless that happens, the whole purpose of IPRs gets lost. When IPRs or patents become equivalent to a trade secret where nothing is disclosed. So I think one needs to recognize this and as we engage in this discussion as to how we are going to address the IPRs issue. Now, the patents innovation leak, and I'm going through it very quickly because I don't have much time. Experience tells us, and this is where the evidence that Mr. Feinstein was mentioning comes very handy, that it varies quite significantly across sectors, industrial sectors, and countries at various stages of development. And it's not kind of a one-size kind of fits all, and everything is taken care of if you have a strong patents system. Now, industries where copying is relatively easy, where in fine chemicals and pharmaceuticals, these are the best examples. Patents are vital for sustaining large and risky R&D ventures. And this is where the pharmaceutical majors have come and argued that they need a strong patent regime to protect the $1 billion investment that they make. Of course, questions are asked about whether this is actually true or not, to develop new molecules. And in industries where copying is very difficult and expensive, patents per se are not very important. And there's substantial evidence to this, but one place where this is all put on in a very lucid manner was a study done in 1986, where, I've given all these numbers as to what is the significance of patents and for all these different industries, and what would be the extent to which R&D would take place in this in these sectors if patents did exist. Again, pharmaceutical and chemicals come right up in front. Now, across countries, we find that things are pretty uneven, because even in 2008, we always knew that the developed countries were right up front in terms of the total patents that they held. Even in 2008, and this is the latest year for which World Intellectual Property Organization gives its data, 3/4 of course China is the big country which occupies the space. A very important report which was published in 2006, a commission on intellectual property rights, innovation and public health, and Dr. Mashkelkar was a member of this commission, made a comment, and a very important comment, I thought, that patents provide a necessary incentive in developed countries where there is both a good technological and scientific infrastructure and a supporting market for new healthcare products. And I think there is a lot of message in this as to how one is going to leverage intellectual property system, the whole regime. There's a lot of message, and I'll come back to it in a moment. And of course, in most developing countries, we find that learning to use imported technologies is really what has happened in many countries. I've listed a few. In India, we often talk about pharmaceuticals as one where a lot of learning on the basis of imported technologies has taken place, and the growth of the generic pharmaceutical industry provides evidence to that. Now, there are, if I may like to make some observations here, that we need a strong national system of innovation for the graduation of developing countries from imitators to innovators. And China and Korea provide some very good examples in this regard. And if you look at the R&D expenditure and the percentage of the GDP, China has been rapidly increasing this expenditure, and Korea spending almost 4% of its GDP on R&D. And the outcome is quite dramatic. The share of residents in the total patent applications has increased exceptionally to high levels in these recent years. And this is a graph I thought tells the whole story. If you look at the two top countries, China and India and Korea, you have residents having a very large share. But when you look at India and Brazil, where we don't have that kind of very, as compared to China and Korea and R&D infrastructure. In India, the share of residents in total patent applications actually come down in the last couple of years. Now, if I may focus on some of the problems that have been talked about in case of IPRs. The first is the whole problem of monopoly, and this can lead to deadweight losses. There can be inefficiencies that can be generated, and efficiency losses because of the monopoly. And again, the report of the Commission on Intellectual Property Rights, Innovation and Public Health had commented on this particular aspect, that what kind of impact this is going to have on the poor. Rent seeking could be a major area of concern because the patent holders may be tempted to seek excessive rents in the absence of adequate oversight mechanisms. And here, I mean, a kind of a watchdog, like we have this competition law in most of the developed countries, and Federal Trade Commission in the US looking at the patent abuses. And there may be problems for future innovation because of these patent rights. Again, point that Mr. Feinstein made at the end, that we need a right balance between the patent rights and keeping the market competition alive that can deter competition. I gave an example from the US very early on how a very broad patent almost killed the automobile industry because of the patent that was granted. And later on, when Henry Ford challenged the patent, and it was narrowed substantially, and we have the industry in place. Questionable patents can harm innovation. We already have evidence of bad patents, which is, and one area which India and other developing countries have been very worried about is traditional knowledge, and this can actually stifle local systems of innovation, and this has been a major area of concern. Biotech industry and industrialized countries have reported that they avoid infringing questionable patents and will refrain from entering or continuing with particular field of research that such patents tend to cover. And of course, the follow-on innovation can be affected because of this. Now, on the questionable patents, one major problem again was mentioned by Mr. Hansen was the problem of patent thicket, and this has been pointed out very prominently by the Federal Trade Commission in their recent reports, and I've given a quote. I won't read the whole thing, but this is an area which is increasingly becoming a problem in patent licensing, and needs to be looked at as patent numbers increase. We may actually be moving into this patent thicket problem in more countries, and where the numbers of patents are actually increasing over time. The key messages, finally, I would, these are the three key messages, that the patent system must have the necessary legal basis to prevent grant of frivolous patents, and this is very important. We have a strong system of checks and balances within the law itself. India has put a number of checks and balances, which again, I think that we need to review them and revisit them time and time again to see whether or not the law and what is happening in practice really are in sync. The proper balance between competition and patent law is vital. One can't emphasize that more. I think it is extremely important, and we need strengthening of institutions to ensure that the raison d'etre for the patent system, which is promote innovation, is really something that is there, and the patent system is not hijacked by rent seekers. And finally, last and not the least, the patent system can play its part, and the evidence that I showed, proved it to an extent. That spurring innovation, patent system can play a role only in the presence of a strong and effective national innovation system. So I think it is extremely important for all of us looking at the role of patent system, not to just talk about strengthening the patent system and to expect that you're going to get new products at the end of the pipe. But you need the necessary systems in place, the necessary innovation systems, and the checks and balances to ensure that the outcomes are in line what the expectations are. Thank you.
You got your message.
Yeah.
They're off the ground, literally. And okay, that slide's gone through properly. And increasingly, as they get more difficult, and given the limitations of in-house R&D, and when I say in-house, this refers as much to a company as it does to a country, and closed systems. More and more money is getting spent and generating and resulting in less and less of IP in relation to the ownership of the total asset of the IP that's required on the total asset. So this is a huge problem, especially as products get more complex across different kinds of fields. So what is the solution? Well, we have one kind of a solution, and I'll just spend a couple of slides talking about it, and then let's see where that goes. So our idea really is to look at a mechanism of open innovation and to go right there in where inventions actually happen. So how do we do this? We identify a set of themes. Currently, we work in 3 areas. In life sciences, we are focused on surgery. In physical sciences, we work on material life cycle management. And in IT, we look at data centers. Now, these themes are defined based on their market potential and also what we're able to reach into, to the extent to which we're able to reach into practitioners in these areas, and so on. Within each of these are broad areas, and they are sort of, we're trying to write the trends of the future. Within each of these, we define specific narrow problem statements, which are called requests for invention. That's an RFI. And we broadcast these to an open network of inventors that's located all over the globe. We work here in India as well, with a lot of science and these inventors they could be individuals, they could be from research labs and so on. So they invent solutions to the problem statements that we put out. The idea thereafter is that we package these solutions together and do 2 things with them. One is IP licensing, which is kind of a portfolio licensing. And the other, we take a small subset of these inventions and try to develop those things out into technologies and products, and then see if we can get something out into the market there. Okay, so much for all of this abstract stuff. I'll just give you a couple of quick examples of what I mean. So here's an example of an RFI. This is a problem statement that we have developed. It's been done in conjunction with a bunch of doctors, and it kind of feeds into needs expressed by a whole bunch of medical practitioners, clinicians, researchers, and so on. And the objective here is pretty simple. When you have, when someone's undergoing radiation therapy, this is for cancer, this is a series of treatments that happens over a period of several weeks. Now, it's very important that the treatment that the radiation, the beam be delivered very precisely, only at the site of the tumor, kill the tumor entirely and not affect any of the good tissue around it, right? What happens though, and in order to achieve this, there's a lot of imaging and there's a lot of diagnostic methods that's used to identify exactly where the tumor is and where's the healthy tissue. But what happens during the course of the treatment, between successive sessions as well as during the session, is that organs inside the body move around. And even if they move around by a few millimeters, the whole objective is kind of lost. So that's the problem statement. There are various methods to solve this, and I will not go into those things. But having done that, there are some limitations, and those are captured in what we want, what we seek from an invention, which is to be able to locate the target, which is the tumor, very precisely, to be able to then figure out how that organ or that part of the tumor is moving around as the treatment is happening, so that in real time you can deliver the radiation exactly where it's needed and not anywhere else. And then, of course, whatever is the mechanism through which you're delivering the radiation, and wherever the target is, those two there must be no relative motion between them. So this is an example of a problem statement. We have a couple of hundred of these, of which about 50 to 70 are active at any point of time. Okay, I'll just talk about a couple of inventions to close the example. And so here's one thing. Lighting is something that's kind of, it's a big area, and there are lots of people out there researching on how to reduce the cost per lumen, which is the measure of illuminance. And typically this is now we're stepping into the field of LEDs. LEDs are made of a material called gallium nitride, and that's heavily patent protected, and there are technologies that are used by a set of companies. Now, the big jump here, or the big disruption here, is to move to zinc oxide. So I don't know if there's really too many people here with this kind of a background, but let's just say that zinc oxide is plentifully available. It's pretty cheap to acquire. The manufacturing processes are relatively easy, but all we have so far is a proof of concept at the lab scale. Okay, but this is a big one. If we ever manage to get something out of this is a multi-$10 billion kind of a marketplace. Okay. And then there are other applications. which, depending on how you dope the substrate and what you do with it, you can use it for other things like lasing action and for other kinds of electronic devices. So this is one quick example. The other one's likely to be a little more interesting. This is in the area of life sciences. Retinitis pigmentosa is a pretty, it's a degenerative medical condition wherein the photoreceptor cells in the human eye start to die out. So with the result that over time your vision starts to tunnel, and over a period of several years the person goes completely blind. There are no known treatment mechanisms for this. There aren't any mechanisms to palliate or to even delay or hold these things back. So that's really the space. And there's been a lot of research over the past 2 decades to get something going in this area with limited success, because these are the challenges. When you're going to put something inside the human body, when you're going to implant something in the eye, this is just a small subset of the many challenges that are going to be there. And so what we have is a solution which is a semiconducting organic polymer which is both a photoreceptor and it's got a transport layer, so which is able to connect to nerve cells, to the optic nerve at the back if that is still not damaged. Okay. Now I just mentioned these 2 examples because there are certain takeaways from here. Firstly, both of these came out of India. Second, both these are snapshots, and there are dozens more like this from our inventor network in India and other parts of the world. Next, these problems are hard problems to solve, and they are worthwhile problems to solve. It's not just something that's incremental. It is really, and it's taken a lot of effort on the part of the inventor, the organization, and somebody like ourselves working with them over a period of several weeks, months, in some instances even more than a year, to be even able to define the problem at this point and to get a proto-solution to it. This is really the valley of death, which is where a lot of talk happens, but there isn't too much work on getting these things out. So it's really about nurturing this innovation and nurturing this invention out. So those are kind of the takeaways. And where do we want to go from here as a company, or sort of to lay it open to the larger forum out here? What are the issues here really? This is a private enterprise that's trying to get in, work with government labs, work with individual inventors, researchers, and so on, find something that's out there, build something useful out of it, and take it to the marketplace. And everything we saw in those 2 inventions there are really still very, very nascent and at the very early stages of things. So since the government is here, here's our wish list. What we do require is, in large measure, to build systemic IP awareness in the entire Indian system, and to incentivize people to go after this thing, to build intellectual property. It's a separate issue later on, whether you want to give it away for free, whether you want to subsidize it, whether you want to charge full market price for it, sell it somewhere else in the world. I see a lot of these viewpoints coming all over the place today. I think these 2 are completely delinked problems. You first need to create the property and establish title for it, and then you decide what you want to do with it. Again, apologies to delegates from the other places. Another thing that we find could go a long way is invention funding, which is completely different from research funding. We're not talking about the money that's given, and a lot of it is given out in India to for people writing papers and doing things like that, and there's a lot of publication happening. But precise funding of inventions with metrics, including the ability to handle failures in a proper fashion. Because everything we see there, it's fraught with failure. Someone put up a slide earlier on saying 1 in 100 and then 1 in 100. So there's really a success rate of something less than 1%. We expect almost everything we do there to fail. So how are you going to create systems to handle that? Other than just saying, yeah, we should, and it's for the social good, we need something stronger than that. And yeah, that's the only way that we're going to build some role models, some success stories, and then move on from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Kumar.
I'm acutely aware that I stand between you and lunch and we are already running late. So I will be mindful of your time and your appetite. I am somewhat unique in this gathering in that I represent Frugal Innovation Research Agenda. And this is actually as part of Intel, which you might come as a surprise because Intel as a company is not known for frugal innovation, which is one of the reasons why I was tasked by the CTO of the company to actually figure out what it meant for a huge company like Intel. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experience on this journey. Why is Intel interested in this problem? It's simple. We have a strategic objective. This decade, we will create and extend computing technology to connect and enrich the lives of every person on Earth. That's a pretty tall and daunting objective, and we are very far away from that. And to be honest, we don't know how to get there from where we are. We've got to figure this out. When we talk about the lives of each and every person on Earth, we're talking about a large number of people in countries like India that we don't reach today. We have come up with a bunch of tenets that guide our approach to this problem. One is be useful, meaning it's very important to come up with relevant applications that improve quality of life. We're not talking about fun stuff necessarily. We're talking about stuff that affects people's daily lives in places like India. A lot of the applications that have been developed, Western countries don't meet this need. They don't meet this requirement. So even if, in this particular case, computers were affordable, they're not necessarily desirable because they don't make an impact. Second, work with the present, meaning deliver immediate ROI and lower the end user total cost of ownership. This means many things. One of the things it means is that if you are selling a product or service, don't expect the person to go off to school and get trained to figure out how to use it. It's got to deliver immediate ROI. Third, lower entry costs. This is a big issue that determines the success or failure of any product in a geography like India. If you look at traditional personal computing products as an example, the entry barrier to purchase of a PC is not very high in a developed country, but it's extremely high in a country like India. And the return on investment is unknown. So as you have to learn from other examples like the growth of mobile telephony here. It succeeded because the barriers to entry are so low. 99% of people here are prepaid subscribers of mobile phone services. It's a tremendously important innovation because it lowers the barrier to entry. Third is cater to a diverse user ecology, meaning do not assume that the user is a white-collar knowledge worker. You have to cater to a very wide range of potential users that don't actually fit the traditional customer profile if you're dealing with a country like India. And what that really means is you need a very high level of user-centered design. You have to remove the complexity from the user, move it all under the hood in the product or service. It must be completely de-skilled. Must be very, very usable. And you have to close the design reality gap, meaning eliminate dependence on hostile infrastructure. A lot of the products that are developed in developed countries, there are implicit assumptions that there is an infrastructure available that they just fit into. That immediately makes their use productive. That is not the case if you're dealing with a country like India, where the infrastructure, to be blunt, is hostile at best in a lot of situations. Great example of this is the availability of electricity. If you want to really have an economy running on information technology, you should have solved the electricity generation problem, availability problem first, because otherwise you cannot assume information services will be there when you need them. You've got to be able to move electrons first before you can move bits. So you have to really, if you want to build products and deliver them into these markets, you've got to design them in such a way that they're resilient to these kinds of infrastructure deficiencies. So really, if you look at the frugal innovation space, there are three vectors that you have to be very mindful about. One is it has to be motivated by a needs-based agenda, as opposed to a technology-driven agenda, which is what companies like Intel are good at doing, technology-driven. Whereas here, we pay a lot of attention to ethnography. How do people actually live? What are the different, how much do they earn a day? What's a day in their lives? Those kinds of things. And of course, the emerging market economics itself. What does the income pyramid look like? What are the opportunity costs, etc.? And you have to design to meet those constraints. Now, the technology side is where the conversation gets to IP and intellectual property. So the real question is, what is the role of intellectual property in all of this? This is a global footprint of innovation that came out of INSEAD. It was a publication from INSEAD. It's kind of hard to read, but basically you will notice that it has two circles on top of every major country, and sometimes the circles overlap, but really the circle on the left is about how much innovation funding comes from dollars generated in that economy. The right circle is how much innovation comes from dollars that are imported from some other economy. And you will notice, US is a very large generator of innovation dollars as well as an importer. But if you move over to the right side and look at India, China, Brazil, etc., you will notice that we are large importers of innovation dollars. But we don't generate enough innovation dollars to drive internal innovation. That is reflected in a low R&D spending as a percentage of GDP as well. There are many other data points that confirm this.